Hey, I'm Nick DiMatteo, and welcome to Season 8, Episode 15 of Music is Not a Genre, MxG. Thank you, as always, for watching and listening. This week's topic is, who are they? Mega huge, non-USA artists we've never heard of. So, again, thank you for watching and listening. I'm going to keep reminding you that the mid-roll is super important because I used to mention all those things at the beginning of each episode, and I've just made an executive decision to put it in the middle, and rather than have two breaks, there's that one. But please do, at least once or twice, give them a listen and go to nickdimateo.com, etc., and all the things I say because they are very important. And stay tuned for this part of the episode. In a week or two, I will be mentioning some new things that are happening. In particular, new shirt designs at the store, nickdimateo.com/shop. I'm mentioning it now because those of you who are just listening, I'm wearing one of the new designs. It's my peace design. You'll understand why it's so important, why I wore it for this episode when we get into it. But it's I'm very excited about the new designs, and please go to nickdimateo.com/shop and see if there's some t-shirts and pullovers and, sweatshirts and all that stuff that you would like. So once again, this topic is one I've been wanting to do for quite a while. It's called, Who Are They? Mega huge, non-USA artists we've never heard of. And originally, I had titled it You've Never Heard Of, but to truth be told, as I was doing my research, I had never heard of a lot of these artists either. And why am I doing this? So during a lot of my research for this podcast, as well as a lot of listening to other music podcasts, I end up hearing about tons of artists I've never heard of. Now, that may not seem unusual because it's not, because there are thousands and thousands of artists none of us have heard of. And the thing is, most of the time it's because they are obscure artists. They had one hit, if that at all, one album, if that at all. So it's understandable that you wouldn't have heard of them. But what blew me away even more is that some of the artists that I had never heard of turned out they were, or even are still, huge in their native countries, as huge as any artist you can think of in the United States. It's a Madonna or a Michael Jackson or, Taylor Swift, people like that. It shocked me that I had never even heard their name, let alone any of their music. And so it made me realize that despite how globally connected the world has become through the internet, truth is, we're still very much in our bubbles. We're very much isolated here in the United States in just about every way, not just as a country, but within each of our, individual bubbles, our core group bubbles, our, peer group bubble, whatever other bubbles that we have. It's very hard, based on algorithms and laziness and just the way the world works, to break out of that bubble. And that can be starkly illustrated by how much music we don't know. Again, from artists as legendary as any that we know here in the United States. So what I'm going to do in this episode is profile 25 countries and describe only one artist from each that are huge in those countries, but whom we likely never heard of, or at least never heard their music, probably both. And yes, this is a microscopic representation. There are far more countries and far more artists, but what it will show is that music from these countries can be every bit as good and important as music from the US, UK, Canada, Australia, the music we know the most. And even one of the biggest artists from each country we still haven't heard of. That's really the big point here. And I say this because this is not about what's the best music from that country, what's the most representative music from that country. I know, because do you think Taylor Swift is the most representative of American music? I don't. I think she's representative of a certain kind of American music, but she is arguably the biggest artist today, right? If someone were doing a podcast like this in Serbia and had never heard of American, music, they might pick Taylor Swift, not because they thought she was the best or most important, but because she's the most impactful and the one where you're like, wait a minute, she's that big and I've never heard of her. Those are the kind of artists that I'm picking from the other countries. And the reasons? Sheer curiosity about the wealth of amazing music we still have to discover, that I still have to discover, all of us. Also showing that cultural divides and isolation and what factors have created it. You know, that cultural divide doesn't just come from, let's say, ignorance or laziness, which we can blame ourselves for that if we want to. It also is somewhat deliberate based on how the world is structured and who kind of runs things, right? Encouraging us to seek out these artists and give them a listen. Of course, that's a huge part of it. This is a music podcast. I'm recommending that you listen to all of the artists I mentioned and maybe extrapolate some better ways of engaging with people and cultures unlike us, far beyond music itself. As you know, I do go beyond music in this show. So the show format, intro, why is this important? And then I'll go country by country in alphabetical order, 25 countries and a bonus 26th country. Conclusions, featured song, and questions. And then this week's bonus MXtra at patreon.com/musicisnotagenre is a deeper dive into one particular country, which is Germany, and how Western music would not be what it is, would not have developed the way it developed without German music. At patreon.com/musicisnotagenre, the bonus MXtra. My sources, Google, Wikipedia, streaming services. That's it really, and some kind of random other, sources that I didn't note, unfortunately. Disclaimers. I am only doing one major artist from each country and also a runner-up artist from each country that in some ways might contrast the main artist that I pick. So naturally, I'll miss a ton of others. I might miss the one artist where you're like, wait a minute, you talked about that country and you didn't mention that artist? That may be deliberate on my part, and it may be just an oversight because there are just far too many to cover. And then tell me who I should have covered. I'll mention them in a future episode, in a catch-up episode. I will not have listened to every song or album from every artist, but enough to give some context and flavor and some song recommendations to you. And of course, how I give those recommendations will reflect my own tastes and biases. There are songs from these artists that are more popular that I did not necessarily enjoy, and others that I like, whoa, yeah, if you're going to listen to them, listen to this. But you may have a different opinion. This will not be a discussion about all the many incredible genres created in other countries. That's a whole different thing. I will mention them when it's important, but mainly I won't, because that's not the point of this exercise. The point is to, again, show how we can know absolutely nothing about something that's absolutely huge somewhere else. I, again, left out lots of countries you might want me to mention. 25 is only a small part of how many countries there are. I would be happy to do another episode just like this one on countries you wished I had mentioned. So please tell me which ones you'd like me to cover. Another disclaimer, I'm going to get into politics and culture more than once. As you know, I do, especially in the conclusions. So if that's not something you want to hear, then skip it. But honestly, if you don't want to hear it, I'd rather you listen to it even more, because I want to hear from you of why you may disagree with me or disagree with me mentioning it or whatever it is. Either way, and if you agree, of course, I want to hear from you as well. And the final disclaimer is this is going to be a little bit longer than a usual episode. At least I think so. As you know, I'm a one-take Willie, so I have no idea how long this will be other than how many pages it is my notes are. So why is this important? First of all, don't say world or global music. These are terms that stemmed from the outlook that anything foreign to our experience is exotic and more different than not, which we'll talk about a little bit later. A little history here. Prior to the coining of world music in the 1960s, music from other countries was alternately called ethnic, international, third world, other various terms. Some of those terms were more specific to the countries and regions. World music became a very codified genre term by the 1980s and has stuck around. Some people still use it, but as far as officially, until very recently, you would hear both world and global music for quite a while. And then in late 2020, there was a watershed, which is the Grammys announced it would officially change for the 2021 Grammys, its best world music to best global music for the 2021 awards, which is both are fine, objectively, subjectively, both have their biases. We'll talk about that. Since then, certainly before then, but never more so than in this decade, we've been exposed far more frequently to music from other countries. And the terminology then has gotten more specific. Reggaeton, Amapiano from South Africa, among other genres not grown here. And we're more familiar with those kinds of genre names than we ever were. You know, the closest that we can think of in the past to something like that might be, ska or reggae, or and some of these songs have gone on to hit actual U.S. charts and to top the charts. We will talk in the conclusions about how and why this has happened and why we could easily have heard this music long before now, or other music, but were more or less prevented from doing so. Yes, I'm setting up a mystery. Why were we prevented from hearing, more or less, music that we could have heard either earlier or at all? That said, as much as we've been exposed to, there's far more we haven't heard or even heard of. Everything we think we know about other countries, whether it's the music, the culture, or the people themselves, is heavily filtered through our own experience. Of course it is. So even those of us who are widely open to people and cultures different from us can't actually know what they're like, what really is different and what's kind of the same, until we go there. And even then, we're visiting with our own biases intact and our own experiences intact. No judgment there, and are prone to both celebrate the commonalities, for better or worse, and feel oddly about the differences, even when we respect them and are curious about them. It's not easy to cross the cultural divide. And that's pretty much how we hear the music too. So as much as I've exposed myself to musically, I still very much judge music from other countries based on how alike or different it is to what I already know, which I think we all do. It's really the only way any of us can do it. We take our experience and we integrate new things based on our own experience. So that's, again, not a judgment call, but it's something to be aware of as it's happening. What makes the difference isn't that, because we all do it, it's whether or not we approach it openly and how we process and integrate or don't integrate what we learn. That's the big difference. Before we get into the music itself, let's keep all this in mind. It's a good way to kind of approach what I'm doing here. And let's also keep in mind why this entire exercise is so important, both for us as music fans and as humans in general, which arguably is even more important. Of course it is. And I will talk about that later, especially. So here are some reasons and some things to think about while we're doing this. Challenging the quote-unquote global hit bias. Just because a band isn't famous here doesn't mean they're not legendary. Boy, you're going to find that out. And discovering acts like this forces you to rethink what great music really is and what success really is. It helps you access rich, untapped catalogs. Many of these artists have decades of music that you've never touched, 20, 30, 40, 100 albums. Delving into these artists' catalogs gives you more depth and variety than you would have if you hadn't listened to it. And you are surprised of the artist's depth and variety and longevity as compared to many U.S. artists who are popular. Break out of the pop bubble. That's another great thing that can help you do. Mainstream U.S. music often recycles the same formulas for a few years at least, and even past a few years, if you really, really think about it. Exploring international artists introduces risk-taking, experimentation, unexpected styles that reinvigorate your personal taste and reinvigorate your creation if you're a creator. Discovering untapped innovation. Many of these artists were trailblazers at home long before the U.S. caught up. They started something that we caught on to. For example, a band I'll mention, Indochine from France, their synth pop experimentation was innovative before other bands did that. And it shows that innovation can be global. And of course, the bonus MXtra, patreon.com/musicisnotagenre, talks about innovation in a big way because I'm diving headlong into Germany and how Western music would not be what it is without German music. Broaden musical perspective, another important thing. Of course, exposure to international music immediately expands your ears. Hearing different scales, rhythms, and production approaches can change how you think about songwriting and composition. And songs itself, whether you're a creator or not, you may be a person who thinks about songwriting. or how a song is put together. You're curious about it even if you don't do it yourself. But especially good for musicians and music creators, most of us rely on diatonic and pentatonic scales, sometimes touching on a few others, while not knowing much about other core scales. And almost all of us rely on the half-tone system of music, so 12 tones, C, C sharp, D, D sharp, etc., all the way up to the high C in a scale. While there are cultures who use quarter tones and in tones in between the quarter tones, which would greatly change our idea of so-called perfect pitch, of which I am not a big proponent of. It's inspiration for U.S. musicians, this kind of listening. If you're a songwriter, producer, or performer, listening internationally can inject fresh ideas into your work. If you can, fusion ideas that we talked about in last week's episode when I talked about 80s was really the first decade where a lot of genre mixing happened, more so than any previous decade and most decades since. Listening to international music can help you do that too. Especially, I've talked to music creators who felt like their music was getting stale or they were running out of ideas. One of the reasons why I never run out of ideas is because I'm always listening to something new. Preserve musical heritage. Many artists represent national or cultural musical milestones. They are institutions in their country, and engaging with them helps keep global music history alive and global world history alive and appreciated. Understanding cultural context. Music is a lens into history, politics, and society. As I always say, music is not a genre. It's not separate from the world. Cultural historians, some of the ones I'm talking about, particular for China, South Africa, and a couple of the other countries, they help you understand the struggles and triumphs in those countries. It fuels curiosity and lifelong learning. Following new artists from other countries or old artists that you've never heard of sparks interests in other cultures and languages and histories. You might start with, there are times where I would listen to a song and because I liked the song, it didn't matter that I didn't understand the lyrics. That's happened often, but sometimes I'm like, no, I really want to know what that is. And you're learning a little bit about that language and you're broadening your perspective. You're connecting through shared humanity. Music speaks across borders. We all experience love and struggle and celebration. And listening to these artists proves that the human experience and condition is universal, even if it's in another language. Now listen, there's no pie in the sky guarantee that being exposed to other cultures on any level will help us understand and empathize more with the actual people. There are people who listen to music from other countries who are not very kind to the people from other countries. In fact, it can sometimes deepen bias by saying, oh, that's that foreign music by the foreign people. But there's a far greater chance of helping us understand and empathize more with people than if we don't expose ourselves to stuff that doesn't come from the U.S. So it's just worth a shot. So let's do some exposing. Let's get into the countries and the artists. Keep looking down at my timer. We're doing well here. So yes, the countries and artists. That's this section. I've probably left out countries you'd want me to cover. Norway comes to mind. Didn't do that one. There are reasons why I left some out, not because I disliked them, but because I'm trying to get a good cross-section from all over the world. But again, let me know if you want me to cover something like Norway or somewhere else, or Iceland, or what have you, or some of the other countries I left out, and I will do another episode just like this. As mentioned, I'm going to go alphabetical by country, and I'm going to do 25. It's only about 1/8 of all the countries in the world, but these countries represent a huge portion of the global population and musical input, musical creation. So I feel like this list is both fairly representative and pretty damn diverse, very diverse. I've tried to pick artists none of us have heard of or we think of as one-hit wonders here. But some of these artists you probably have heard of. I believe that I'm just talking about the main 25 and not the runners-up, I think there were maybe 3 that I had heard of before, which is not great. And the whole point of doing this. The runners-up, I heard of quite a few more, but still not very many. Either way, it's likely you don't know how incredibly huge they are or were in their countries of origin. I know, again, mostly I didn't. And finally, I repeat that one artist and the runner-up, they're far from enough to represent the diversity of each country. But I'd rather do more countries than more artists from a specific country. And to do that in the general hour that this show is, I need to limit myself. But I will, as I said, mention a runner-up. I'm not going to go into their story the way I would for the main artist, but just kind of wet your whistle and say there's more beyond that main artist. And again, feel free to tell me I picked the wrong artist. I should have picked somebody else in that country, etc. I get it. But if you're going to do that, please tell me why, because that's how the conversation starts. Like, I'd like to know your reasoning. And interestingly enough, despite how obscure these artists are here in the States, every single artist I mention, all 50 plus, can be found on streaming services. So it is super easy to hear the music. Super easy. And honestly, doesn't take that much time. So please consider it. So first country, Argentina, alphabetical. The artist I'm profiling, Soda Stereo. Around from 1982 to 1997 and a few reunions since then, including this year. Massive Latin American alt-rock band, often cited as the region's greatest alt-rock band. It's the band that made rock in that region feel modern, stylish, and continental rather than local. Mixing post-punk, new wave, and arena-scale ambition, Soda Stereo became the first true pan-Latin rock superstars and remain the genre's gold standard. They released 7 albums, had a ton of hits. If I had grown up in Argentina, I would totally have been into them. My suggestions are the songs De Música Ligera for their alt-rock side, which has over 700 million streams on Spotify. The evil Spotify, but yes. And Persiana Americana, which has over 500 million streams and is more on their new wave side. If you like U2, try Soda Stereo. And I will do an if you like for every main artist. The runner-up, Charly Garcia, a Beatles tier influence in Argentine rock history, has a mix of styles including rock, pop, folk, jazz, new wave, and experimental. Next country, Australia, which was harder to do here because we actually have heard of most of the huge artists from Australia, because some have gotten huge here too. But here are 2 that are somewhat lesser known, at least. My main pick is the Go-Betweens. Around from 77 to 89, and again from 2000 to 2006. Kind of indie rock, jangle pop, new wave, power pop. They were endlessly influential. They blended literate songwriting, great melodies, emotional ambiguity. They helped invent indie rock long before it had a name. They're just huge for an artist you maybe have never heard of. Never commercially dominant, their legacy lives in the countless bands that learned from their balance of intimacy, intelligence, and pop craft. Proof that influence doesn't have to be commercially successful, but can be lasting. They released 9 albums in total from both eras. Some recommended listening, Streets of Your Town, over 23 million streams, and Was There Anything I Can Do, which was actually top 20 on the U.S. Modern Rock Chart in 1988. I really enjoyed their sound. And by the way, later on, I'm going to talk about my favorite of these 25 artists I talk about, as well as the country's music I most enjoy. If you like REM, try the Go-Betweens. The runner-up, Midnight Oil. I could have picked so many. They're remembered in the U.S. if you know them from the 80s for How Do We Sleep When Our Beds Are Burning, but revered at home as a national institution, not a one-hit wonder. Kind of like when I talked about Spandau Ballet for Britain for my bonus. They're very, very political, uncompromising, very serious. They prove that stadium rock could have a conscience and could confront serious issues and still be entertaining. Brazil, next country. I don't know how to pronounce Portuguese, so forgive me in advance. I'm going to say Legião Urbana. They were around from 1982 to 96. They were a post-punk alt-rock kind of new wave band with a mythic status. They were poetic, introspective, politically charged. They were touchstones for the people of that era. They were sang about alienation, ethics, emotional survival. They released 8 albums. Listen to the song Tempo Perdido almost 400 million streams. And Ainda Cedo, close to 100 million streams. I like the sound. They're not my favorite band, but I do like their general sound. If you like Joy Division and the Smiths, then you have to try La Jaya Urbana. The runner-up, Chico Buarque, Chico Buarque, songwriter of immense cultural and political importance. Next country, our neighbor, Canada. Again, so many bands from Canada we already know. So I went with one we probably don't know called Blue Rodeo. Started in 1984 and are still going. Hugely respected roots rock, alt country, alt rock band. Ignored in the U.S. Masters of melancholy roots rock with kind of a cult-like respect in Canada. They blend country and rock and introspective songwriting and are kind of a benchmark for a lot of people who want to do that kind of music. They have released 16 albums, the most recent in 2021. Recommended listening. Hasn't hit me yet. Has over 30 million streams. And the song Try with over 13 million streams. Again, this music isn't really my cup of tea, but you can tell how amazing they are. If you like the band or Bruce Springsteen, try Blue Rodeo. Runner-up from Canada, the Tragically Hip. We've heard them here. If you know enough about music, you've heard of that band. But they're a national institution in Canada. Very deeply Canadian. Again, they have 4 U.S. main chart hits, so they have had some impact here. Next is Chile. And the main pick here is Los Prisioneros. They were around from 1982 to 92, and again from 2001 to 06. They're kind of an 80s punk, new wave band, post-punk, political lyrics, massive cultural influence in Chile and across Latin America. They were the sound of resistance in an era of repression, stripped down, synth-driven punk, so post-punk, new wave, and ska with blunt lyrics, very political. They reshaped Latin American rock's relationship to power and protest, which we take for granted here. It isn't something that is always allowed in other countries. They released 6 albums, including 2 from that later era in the 2000s. I would recommend listening to Estreches de Corazón for their synthier sound that has 165 million streams, and Por qué no se van for a more ska sound, which has over 100 million streams. And hey, why am I mentioning streams? Why does it matter? Because as a music creator, fuck all, right? And don't pardon my French, and that wasn't French. That was me being pissed at the fact that we tend to measure things by success rather than quality. But the reason I'm mentioning them here is to show you how hugely successful these artists are in other countries, and yet we've never heard of them. That's why. If you like Depeche Mode or The Clash, then I would recommend Los Prisioneros. Runner-up, Mon Laferte. It's a contemporary singer blending pop, rock, and Latin American traditional music. It's a cult figure in some of the Spanish-speaking countries. China. Qijian, who started in 1984 and is still going, is considered the father of Chinese rock. Consider how oppressive the culture in China was, and I know still is to some degree, but way more even then, that rock had a father in 1984, whereas here in the States, 1950s, Very politically significant, hugely influential, really started the Chinese rock scene. It blending Western rock with Chinese folk elements, subversive lyricism. He was a symbol of the cultural awakening and the defiance in a society that's very tightly controlled. He's one of those chameleons who's done a little bit of lots of styles and done them all well. Rock, folk, pop, hip-hop, electro, jazz, experimental. He has released 8 albums, the most recent in 2021. I would recommend you try the album the song Fake Monk, which, by the way, difficult to search for because even on the streaming services, it's in kanji or the Chinese writing. But if you look hard enough, you can find the English language translation of the title, so you can find the songs. And I say Fake Monk, Qijian, over 850,000 streams, and the song Last Shot. More melodic and orchestral than the first one and very nice. Again, not my sound, but very solid. If you like Bob Dylan and John Lennon, especially their 70s work, try Qijian. Runner-up, Beyond. It's a Hong Kong-based rock band revered across China and very popular still to this day. And we're kind of more youthful band, Beyond. Let's do one more. Colombia. And my recommendation is Aterciopelados. 1992 they started, and they're still going. They're an alternative rock band blending folk, punk, and pop. Highly influential in that region. They're playful, they're punky, and they're very Colombian. Not all of these artists, including, how many artists sing about being American other than country artists and, and certain others. Not everyone, folk artists, whatever. But you can say they're distinctly American, whatever. Same with all of these artists. Some are their identity is tied into the country as far as lyrically and all of that stuff, and even in some of the little flavors they have. But some are less so. This one more so. This band fused alt rock with folk rhythms and feminist, environmental, and political themes, opening doors for other alternative music in that area to be both locally rooted in sound, but also globally appreciated. They have released 9 albums, the most recent in 2021. I would recommend listening to Barakunatana, 67 million streams, and Florecita Rockera, 43 million streams. 2 different flavors of the same band. I generally like their earlier sound more. And if you like the B-52s or Blondie, I would recommend Aterciopelados. Good band. Runner-up, Bomba Estéreo, known for trope pop, which blends cumbia with electronic music. They're a staple in Colombia's current alternative scene. And we're going to take a break there. I don't know if this is the halfway point. Second half may be longer. That's on you. No, that's actually on me. But either way, we're getting to a pretty important country for me because it recommends one of the first bands that made me realize I had no idea what the hell was going on in other countries. And we're going to hear that right after this break. Talk to you in a minute. Hey, MxG fans, thank you as always for watching and listening. Listeners, go to youtube.com/@musicisnotagenre. You get a video for every episode of this podcast. Watchers, go to nickdimatteo.com/musicisnotagenre if you would rather just listen. And everyone, please take some time out to go to patreon.com/musicisnotagenre to support this podcast, my band rec, and everything I do for as little as $1 a month. Speaking of everything I do, nickdimatteo.com really does have it all. If you're interested in unique and quirky t-shirts that I've all personally hand-designed, go to nickdimatteo.com/shop, and you can find it all there, including discounts if you sign up for my newsletter or Patreon. If you're someone who's always wanted to write a song, has just never figured out how to get there, let me work with you. I am the Song Coach. Go to nickdimatteo.com/thesongcoach, and whether you're a complete beginner or completely advanced, I can get you there. You can book a free 30-minute call right there on the site. And of course, I am always releasing new music. Go to nickdimatteo.com/music to find it all. My complete discography is there. All of the social links are there. And of course, please like, share, subscribe, rate, review. Do it for the podcast. Do it for the music. Sharing is especially valuable to all of us indie creators. I really appreciate your support, your eyes and ears. Thank you for hanging with me for this mid-roll, and let's get back to the show. All right, we are back with the next country, and just to clarify, when I say this is a big country, it's no more important than any of these other countries. You could argue. I say that because, again, it was one of my kind of spiritual awakenings to what else is going on in the world. And that country is France. Because we've heard of French artists, Edith Piaf, whatever. We think we know. I guess Daft Punk, they're from French, right? But we don't. And here's an example. I know a guy who knows a shitload about music and has never heard of my main pick here, Indochine. And the only reason I know Indochine is because I heard a song of theirs a couple of years ago on like a film or television show and was interested in hearing more. They did a cover of You Spin Me Right Round by Dead or Alive. And I was like, oh my God, who are they? And it turns out they are one of the bands who inspired this episode, one of the main bands who inspired this episode, and are about the hugest you can get in France. They started in 1981 and are still going. It's stadium-sized new wave alt rock. 45 years. They're a juggernaut They're moody, they're melodic, they're theatrical, they're emotional. They turn post-punk aesthetics into stadium-scale pop, which is not easy to do, sustaining a massive multi-generational fan base. All this time. They have released 14 albums, and the most recent is in 2024. This is one of the, maybe the only band on this list I've listened to all of their recordings, and I actually really like them. Really, really like them. And I think we'll get to why you might like them. I would recommend pretty much everything they've done, but I'm going to recommend extra songs here. L'Aventureux, 125 million, The Adventurer, that means. Trois Nuits par Semaine, 53 million. La Vie est Belle, 46 million. Un est Français, 23 million. That may be a misprint. It may be Français. Un est Français. It might be. I don't remember. And those are all songs I love from them, but there's probably another 20 that I love. And also their new album, 2024, Babble Babble, is as good as anything they've done. If you like David Bowie and The Cure, but especially Duran Duran, and the wide range of styles of all those artists, I would highly recommend Indochine. A runner-up would be Téléphone, France's definitive classic rock band that has had huge cultural impact. And now we get to Germany. Herbert Grönemeyer, 1978 to present, one of Germany's best-selling artists ever, arena-scale pop rock poet, a blend of a poet, pop star, and national voice. His emotionally direct songwriting and unmistakable delivery made him Germany's most trusted chronicler of love, loss, and modern life at true arena scale. He's one of those big pop people you either love or love to hate, basically. He has released 16 albums, most recent in 2023. Recommend listening to the song Manor, 47 million streams. It's very synth poppy. Or I guess it's Manor. And then Der Weg, Derweg, 44 million streams, which is a stripped down ballad. He's not my cup of tea. He's not. But if you like the balladier side of Billy Joel or Phil Collins, he's kind of like that. And also freaking huge in Germany. Runner-up, Die Toten Hosen, is a punk band with mainstream status in Germany. And you notice how with Germany, we do know some bands from Germany, especially if we know music history. I didn't mention Neu or Kahn or Kraftwerk, because if you know music history, you've heard of them. I'm trying to talk about artists you haven't heard of. But I will be talking about those artists and others in the bonus MxG at patreon.com/musicisnotagenre on Germany's huge influence on all of Western music. Greece, Haris Alexiou, worked from 1970 to 2020. I guess it's Haris Alexiou, though she's still alive, but apparently no longer singing. I think she's still acting. She's legendary, spans pop and folk and laiko and even some remix. As she moves between all of these traditional music and contemporary music, contemporary pop. She is deeply emotional, technically masterful, great voice, frankly, and universally respected across all of the generations that she's touched, which is 50 years. She released around 40 albums, the most recent, and I guess her final one, in 2020. I would recommend, and I am terrible at pronouncing Greek, Apopsithelonopio, which has 10 million streams, a very big-voiced ballad, and Ola Se Thimizun, 5 million streams, which is an intimate acoustic ballad. Again, I'm not really into this kind of music, but her remixes, which are subtitled reworks, are pretty cool. I would check them out too. But I wanted to give you kind of her more signature sound songs as a start. If you like Edith Piaf, Lorena McKennitt, Adele, her style was wide-ranging, as you can imagine from someone with such a long career, so there's a lot to be interested in there. Runner-up is Dimitris Mitropoulos. He's an iconic singer of Greek folk and contemporary classics. On a personal note, I am apparently part Greek by descent, although not by recent descent. Ancestry.com, who knows? But part of my bloodline is Greek. I don't know a lot about the culture because I didn't grow up that way. There are a few artists across the world also named Rec, R-E-C, like my band. Though I don't think there are any others in the U.S. that I know of. The one that seems to be the most successful of those other artists named Rek is Rek from Greece. And their stuff often gets confused with mine on some of the streaming services. So if you're listening to a Greek language song when you go to Rek on any of the streaming services, that wasn't me. That was the other Rek. But enjoy them anyway. Speaking of personal connection, Hungary. I recommend the band Omega. 1962 to 87, and then again 1994 to 2001, they were a psychedelic progressive rock band, pioneers in Hungary. They're Hungary's most famous rock band. And they were the ambassadors to psychedelic and prog rock for all of Eastern Europe. Their kind of expansive cosmic rock went everywhere behind the Iron Curtain, making them Hungary's most internationally recognized rock band. They released 20 albums, though if you count the re-records in English, there were over 30 albums. And they also did one album in German. And I'm not... Look, I am half Hungarian by descent. I don't know how to pronounce Hungarian, which will actually be quite a joke later on in this episode, and you'll see why. But I'm going to try. The song I would recommend, Gyöngyhajú Lányi, 29 million streams, a.k.a. Pearls in Her Hair, if you want to search for it that way, which the English version has 3.6 million streams, for the more expansive psychedelic rock sound of theirs. And I would also recommend Petroleum Lampa at 1.3 million streams for something with a more pop driving sound, but still has those trippy elements. And I actually like their sound overall. I've heard a lot of Hungarian music, and I'll explain why later. I do tend to like it. If you like Moody Blues, Pink Floyd, Deep Purple, then I absolutely recommend Omega. A runner-up is Éles. They're a key 60s, 70s rock group foundational to modern Hungarian pop and rock. My ancestors were from nearby Budapest, I believe, just like Omega. And by the way, stick around for the end of the episode. The featured song, you're going to hear me sing in Hungarian, even though I learned it for the song and then completely forgot. And I'll also talk a little bit more about that Hungarian listening experience. India. Main dude, Kishore Kumar, from 1946 to 87, when he died at age 58. He's legendary singer, culturally omnipresent. He was a cultural force. His voice defined decades of Indian cinema. He's capable of humor and heartbreak and romance and weight, just everywhere in India for the time that he existed and probably after that. Because Bollywood is so huge, it's hard to separate Indian musical cultural impact from it. So this artist pick kind of makes sense to me because he was a huge film star. And besides Hindi, he sang in many other Indian languages, including Bengali, Marathi, Assamese, Gujarati, Kannada, Bhojpuri, Malayalam, Odia, and Urdu. Forgive me for all of that. Most of what he released were songs on film soundtracks starting in the late 1940s, though he did eventually release some non-film singles. Recommended listening. Pal Pal Dil Ke Paas, 170 million. More compelling than you'd think. And then, excuse me, Nila Nila Ambar Par, 139 million streams. More upbeat than the first song. I haven't delved into as much Indian music as I would like, but I have tended to like everything I have heard, especially the stuff from the movies, believe it or not. If you like 1960s Elvis or Sinatra or Michael Bublé, then I would recommend Kishore Kumar. A runner-up is A.R. Rahman, who is known in the U.S. for the Slumdog Millionaire soundtrack, but he's a colossal figure to this day in India. Okay, Ireland, one of my favorites. Ireland, Horselips is the band I'm recommending. Around 1970 to 1980, again in 2004 to 06, and again in 2009 to 2012. They are pioneering Celtic rock band, blending the folk traditions and progressive rock. They really were the first band to do that to any significance in Ireland. They worked in folk traditions and mythology, but they were in basic modern progressive rock for the time, and so many bands were influenced by them in Ireland and worldwide. They released 10 albums starting in 1972 and the last one in 2004. I would recommend the song Derrig Doom 5 million. I loved it. Also, Trouble with a capital T, 2.6 million streams. Those songs are both progressive. They're driving and they're freaking catchy. If you like Jethro Tull, if you like Thin Lizzy, if you like 1970s Genesis, I would absolutely recommend Horselips. Runner-up, hard to pick because we know a lot of Irish artists. I'm going to go with U2. Just kidding. I'm going to go with The Frames. Influential alt-rock folk rock band led by Glenn Hansard, which you know that guy from the movie Once, which is a movie I loved, and the music I loved. Again, I could have picked so many. I shied away from artists like Enya or the U2 or the Chieftains or, you know, all those things, Kneecap, for many reasons. But I'd have to say that Irish music in general is one of my passions, so that may be why I know so much about it. Italy, my other half Italian. I'm going to recommend Vasco Rossi, 1977 to present. Stadium-filling rocker for decades. He's a rebel poet, raw, emotional, populist. He's the voice of outsider angst at stadium scale. Devoted fans, not necessarily critically loved. Kind of, to me, generic pop rock, but very, very well done. Released 33 albums if you include the live ones. Most recent, 2025, which was a live album. I'm going to recommend Sally, 93 million streams as a piano power ballad, and Quanti Anni Hai, 34 million streams. I guess it's Quanti Anni Hai? I don't know. More powerful guitar-driven ballad. Seems like most of his stuff is big ballads. Not a favorite sound. And even though I'm half Italian, there's very little Italian music that I actually enjoy. Don't ask me why. It's just not my style. But if you like Rod Stewart and some of Springsteen and Tom Petty, then go for Vasco Rossi. Runner-up, Lucio Battisti, legendary songwriter, Beatles tier influence on Italian pop. And that's it for Italy. Japan, one of my early obsessions from as early as the 1980s, if not before then. I'm going to recommend, again, I could say Shonen Knife because I've loved that band since forever, but I'm going to go with one that's had a bigger impact on the culture, I believe, and that is Mr. Children. I noticed how Japan, like South Korea, often does things in both their native language and English. Mr. Children started in 1989 and are still going. One of Japan's best-selling bands ever. Melodic rock pop masters. Very sincere. Emotionally deep, but accessible. Everyday life with uncommon consistency and care. They're power pop art rockish is how I would describe them. They have released 25 albums if you include the compilations, and the most recent was in 2023. I recommend Namonaki Uta, almost 52 million streams, and Innocent World, 51 million streams, both jangly, mid-tempo power pop. If you like crowded house, mid-period REM, some of Tom Petty, other kind of jangly pop, jangle rock stuff, then I would recommend Mr. Children. Runner-up, Southern All-Stars, cultural institution since the late 1970s, beloved since then. Next country, Mexico, Caifanes, 1986 to 96, 2011 to present. So a big break, and then they're still going. Alt-rock legends. They have a Cure-level devotion in that area and in Latin America in general. They're gothic. They're mystical. They're just so beloved everywhere there. They combine post-punk atmospheric feel with a Mexican identity. And they help define Latin alternative rock's emotional palette. They only released 4 albums during their heyday, though they've released quite a few singles since then, including one in 2025. I would recommend Viento, 391 million streams, and Mátenme porque me muero, 168 million streams. And their latest single, Y Caíste, is also damn good. So I would go for those 3. If you like The Cure, New Order, or The Smiths, try Caifanes or Caifanes. I wish I could have the stress. I don't know where the stress is. Runner up, Jose Jose, iconic balladeer, Sinatra-level stature in Mexico. New Zealand, I'm going to recommend The Chills. Started in 1980 and still going with 3 small breaks in the 80s and 90s. They're a key band in the Dunedin sound scene. Is it Dunedin or Dunedin? Influential indie alternative rock band with a cult status. Melancholy, elegant, jangle pop, introspective songwriting. Everyone who knows music, who knows their music, reveres them. They've released 8 albums, the most recent in 2025. I recommend the song Pink Frost with 9 million streams. Very moody, very, very good. And Kaleidoscope World, which has over 500,000 streams, which has amazing production. I really like the production of this song. Generally wide-ranging sound that generally I like, which I say about generally New Zealand. If you like Echo and the Bunnymen or early Cure or REM or mid-80s goth, you gotta go with the Chills. Runner-up, may have heard of them, band called Split Enz. ENZ. They're art rock new wave pioneers from the 70s and 80s. Very, very famous locally, but mostly known in the US for their song, I Got You, That's All I Want. Son, I don't know why sometimes I get frightened. You see my eyes and tell that I'm not lying. Crowded House partly stemmed from them. Next country, Nigeria. King Sunny Ade, 1960s to present, a juju music legend, known a bit internationally. I think I may have sort of heard of his name, but maybe have heard his music and not known it. His intricate hypnotic guitar work and expansive arrangements brought Nigerian popular music to international ears while still keeping it grounded. I believe he has released 123 albums. Whoa. I would recommend the song, any song that you hear from him. I loved this guy. But a particular Appreciation, 2 million streams, or Alache Laie with 1.3 million, which has a very cool, freaking weird organ solo. But again, I can listen to his music part of every day. The If You Like is a very tough section because the artists I'm going to mention were very directly inspired by Nigerian music. So, keep that in mind, but I would say if you like Talking Heads or Tune Yards, if you like Graceland, Paul Simon, of course, Vampire Weekend or Dirty Projectors, then I would go for King Sunny Ade. Runner-up, Tubaba or Two-Face Idibia is one of Africa's most influential pop artists. But a lot's going on in Nigeria. A lot. Right now. I'm picking the ones that are more legendary, but go for Nigerian music. Russia. I'm going to recommend Kino, fronted by Victor Tsoi. Started in 1981 and ended in 1990 when Victor died at age 28. And then they reformed in 2019 with a new singer, with one reunion somewhere in between there. They're a mostly Soviet-era rock band, the voice of a generation, right when everything was collapsing. Minimalist, poetic, emotionally restrained. They were a symbol of freedom and youth and moral clarity right when the Soviet Union was falling apart. They had 8 albums, all in their heyday. I would recommend Kochu Peremen, I Want Change, 31 million streams, and Grupe Sanguine, 35 million streams. I can't pronounce Russian. Not a bad sound. I don't love the vocals, but I do really enjoy the sound. If you like Joy Division, Bauhaus, Depeche Mode, The Smiths, it is that kind of baritone voice. You're gonna like Kino a lot. The runner-up will be DDT or DDT, I guess. I don't know. Long-running, politically outspoken rock institution. Generally, the Russian music I've heard, I've really enjoyed. Spain. Héroes de Silencio, 1984 to 96, and then a quickie in 2007. They're epic alt-rock goth post-punk band, huge across Spain and parts of Latin America. Grand, dramatic, emotionally maximal. They were titans in their regions, turning introspection into something operatic and massive, which kind of emo, gothy bands do. They only released 4 albums, but they were huge. I would recommend Entre Dos Tierras, 350 million streams, and Malas Intenciones, Bad Intentions, 41 million streams. I more or less really like their sound. If you like The Cult or U2 or The Cure, go for them. Runner-up is Mecano, synth pop giants of the 1980s, ABBA-level popularity in the Spanish-speaking world. Okay, South Africa. Tough here again. So many great artists. And again, I could have picked artists more culturally representative, etc., but I'm going for the biggest to make my point further. And one of those is someone I actually had heard of before, especially in the 80s, and that's Johnny Clegg. 1969 to 2018, which I believe is when he died. He was nicknamed the White Zulu. Huge cultural bridge figure during apartheid. Very anti-apartheid. Blending Zulu music with Western pop. He used rhythm and collaboration as acts of resistance and reconciliation. Again, maybe not the most important from South Africa, but certainly, seminal. 27 albums with and without his bands, Jaluka and Savuka. I remember Johnny Clegg and Savuka from the 80s. I don't know why. I would recommend the songs Dela, 24 million, and Scatterlings of Africa of 7 million. If you like, again, Peter Gabriel, Paul Simon, kind of like Nigeria, these artists were influenced by South Africa, so hard to separate. But if you like that sound, you're going to like Johnny Clegg. A strong runner-up is Mandoza, Kwaito Pioneer, enormous domestic impact. South Korea, I'm going to recommend Cho Young-pil. Started in 1968 and is still going. He's the godfather of Korean pop, which we know that K-pop is huge. So thank you, Cho Young-pil. Massive legacy, crossing genres and generations, and boy, did he cross genres. He showed that Korean pop could be emotionally expressive, commercially dominant, and mix both Korean elements with Western elements. He has released 20 albums, the most recent in 2024. I would recommend so many of his songs, but in particular, Red Pepper Dragonfly, Oh God, Trippy, over 238,000 streams, frickin' love it. But then also Bounce, 1.8 million streams, a great electro power pop song. If you like K-pop, you're going to love this guy. He mixes Korean with English in some of his lyrics. I'd also recommend Short Hair with over 670,000 streams. Also, Bounce and Short Hair are the only two songs that I'm mentioning in this episode that I have added to my 2026 playlist. That's how much I like this guy. If you like McCartney or Phil Collins, some boy band stuff, K-pop, if you like Elton John and more trippy pop rock, I don't know. He's one of those artists who's tried on lots of different genres and done them all well. Just give him a listen. Runner-up, Lee Seung-chul, arena-level rock balladeer and a household name in Korea. Next one, Sweden. I'm going to recommend the band Kent, who were from 1990 to 2016 and a quick reunion last year in 2025. They're the biggest modern alt synth pop rock band from Sweden, singing in Sweden mostly. Massive. Moody, literate. Very, very Swedish in identity. They were the country's biggest modern rock band, and they released 12 albums. I'm going to recommend Utan Dina Andatag, 93 million streams, big alt-rock ballad, and Parlor, 50 million streams, more driving, but equally moody song. I overall really, really like their sound. Really like their sound, and I do like a bunch of Swedish music, including The Hives. If you like Radiohead, Oasis, U2, or Ride, you are going to like Kent. Runner-up would be Lars Winnerbach, poet-level songwriter with arena-scale popularity and very different from Kent. The United Kingdom, UK, is the final one on the list of 25, and the one that truly, one of two bands, but the one that truly inspired me to finally do this episode is the band Status Quo, 1962 to present. Longest running of this list, I believe. It's fitting that I'm ending with this country and band. One, because it's one of my favorite, countries for music and things in general. And again, it inspired this. They were and are one of the best-selling UK bands ever. Kind of boogie rock, at least in most of their career. Ultimate workhorse band, relentless touring, simplicity, one of the best-selling acts in Britain. Gigantic in Britain. Status Quo. Never heard of them until last year. They played at the UK section of Live Aid. By the way, they released 33 albums, the most recent in 2019. They're not really my sound mostly, although I really kind of love their earlier sound, their trippier kind of 60s sound. That said, and including that, later, they're boogie rock, Whatever You Want. 133 million streams. Pictures of Matchstick Men, 26 million streams. That's the sound of theirs I really like. And you may recognize the name of that song because Camper Van Beethoven did a great cover of it in the 80s. I didn't know it was a cover at the time. I didn't know it was a cover till last year. Pictures of Matchstick Men and you. It's a 60s song. If you like Grand Funk Railroad, AC/DC, Canned Heat, Aerosmith, Steve Miller, lots of kind of the cock rock bands of the 80s, you're going to like Status Quo. Again, not my cup of ale there, but if you're not into that, listen to their 1968 album with Pictures of Matchstick Men and also Elizabeth Dreams. It's a great song. Runner-up would be, who knows, right? It's Britain. I'm going to say Squeeze because I love power pop. They only had a few hits here in the U.S., but they are institutions in the U.K. Bonus 26th country before we get to conclusions is the United States. Why? Because please keep in mind that after all of that, there are tons of U.S. artists you've never heard of or heard the music of, including Wreck, my band, which I try to expose the world to, try to make you understand that I have a body of work that, like many other indie artists, deserves to be loved, frankly. Joy Buzzer would be another one, other bands that I'm in, but also artists like The Millennium, who were around in the late 60s. I think they did one album. They deserve a listen. Why do you not know them? Because I'll tell you why later. Multiply that by 10,000. And that's what you get here in the U.S. and in many other countries. But the important thing is don't get overwhelmed. Pick one or two, try them out. Don't like those one or two, try two more. Do two each day. It'll take you a few minutes, frankly. And we indie artists appreciate people who fly under and over and sideways from the radar to find more obscure music. And finally, to close out this section, yes, I did not include most of the Scandinavian countries, again, like Norway has a huge death metal scene. I didn't include a lot of Eastern European countries, which has more EDM than you would think. I didn't include any of the stands. I didn't include some of the East Asian, African, and South American countries. They're all worthy of inclusion. And if you want me to talk about another 25, just let me know, and I'll do another episode. And of course, if you want to know more about Germany itself, bonus MXtra at patreon.com/musicisnotagenre. So conclusions, first of all, notice how the stats I was giving, like when they formed, when they broke up, how many albums, all their streams, were very similar to any huge bands we know of in the US, which means that in-country, near-country fan experience was probably very much the same as the things we experience here. And it illustrates how much we don't know. And second, for almost all of the top-selling artists, though their music has flavors of their country, they aren't folk artists. It's one of the reasons I did this. When we think of music from other countries, we think of the cliches of their folk music, which is folk music's great, but we make it cliche. This list shows that all of these countries have modern music representation and have had for decades and should not be dismissed as, oh, that's foreign music, world music, global music, exotic music. No, stop that. And third, and possibly the most important, we need to examine how we discover music. What do I mean by that? Even though the internet has gone a great way towards us knowing more about music that we wouldn't discover otherwise, it's more or less leveled the playing field for listeners, not for artists. It's a disaster for artists, but for listeners, it is severely leveled the playing field in many good ways. What we hear still very much influenced and dictated by the music industry and what the labels and media and the powers that be choose to release to us and promote. It's always been that way. So in an upcoming episode of Back Talk, Steve Erickson and I are going to talk about Mood Machine, which is on Spotify and all of its issues. And one of my observations of that book, kind of giving you a preview, is that it describes things that Spotify does that have been happening in the music industry since forever, just at a different scale, right? And one of these is for every legendary band, for every mega famous band or artist, there are a handful of contemporaries that were just as good, if not better, could have been equally or more famous, and are now pretty much lost to history because they were not promoted by the music industry. Some of it, yes, is a numbers game. To be fair, companies can't promote every artist who's good. Decisions have to be made. And some of those decisions were on the up and up. Some were, they paid somebody and that's how they got famous, whatever. We can't all be winners, no matter our levels of talent, but it makes you question how different music history would have been if there was a different system, one that allowed all music to be exposed at similar levels, truly giving us the power to decide what should or shouldn't be revered forever. And to get to that, all that obscure, unchosen historical music from the usual countries, US, UK, Canada, Australia, let alone even the not obscure music that I discussed in this episode, that takes work, which is unfair to us because who has the time? But it's worth the effort, and it doesn't take as long as you think. And I've expended some of that effort here for you, hopefully, so you don't have to do all the work yourself. So listen, go forth, try out the artists I recommended or find others that you like better. Either way, step outside of your bubbles. Some general conclusions that might help you get the right mindset for that. Most countries have hidden giants. You've seen that. Language is not a barrier to impact. So many songs I like, I don't know what they're saying, but I'm open to the sound and the vocalist and the production, and I may learn the language, I may not, but I still like the music. Innovation often happens abroad first. We've talked about that, and we're going to talk about it in the bonus MXtra at patreon.com on Germany and how much innovation they did. Oh my God. Cultural context deepens appreciation. Yes, let's say that again. Cultural context deepens appreciation of not just the music, but history, politics, social environment, the culture in general. Global artists can expand taste beyond US-centric patterns, and that's like super important to one of the other big points I'm making with this episode, which is that just stop it with ICE. Just stop it with the immigration. Oh, I mean, it's simple for me to say that, but what do I say? Why? Anyone who immediately demonizes people who aren't like them, quote unquote, is acting from fear. And it's very likely that fear is being trumped up for false reasons and deliberately drummed up to divide us, keep us fighting amongst ourselves and drain us of both the will to fight the powers that be and the true opposition and whatever power and money they can siphon from us. Keeping an open mind about discovering music from other countries might be the first step to help us break through our current ICE culture and embrace both the commonalities and the differences between us, whoever you consider us to be, and people we possibly falsely believe are not like us or aren't like us in some ways but are more like us than we think. And since, again, that's an important statement because it covers all of life and certainly the current cultural climate. But since it's primarily about the music, let's get back to it and talk about ways you can jump into this without feeling overwhelmed. Start with my suggestions. If you like so-and-so, then try this. Listen in batches. Explore by genre, by decade, by cultural theme, by country. Pick one country. Learn a little context first. Read about the artist, then listen to them. I love doing that. I love reading about an artist before listening. Use curated playlists or music discovery hubs specific to countries or regional scenes. Mix eras and languages just for fun. That might spark some things. Don't stick to just what's going on now. Go all the way back to the 60s. After doing a lot of this for research and not for research, here are my favorite artist discoveries. Just from this episode. There are way too many outside of this episode. Soda Stereo from Argentina, The Go-Betweens from Australia, Indochine from France, Horselips from Ireland, Cho Young Pil from South Korea, Blew Me Away. And again, his songs are the only ones I put on my 2026 playlist, and Kent from Sweden. Now, my top countries in general for their sound, and not necessarily because of the artists I picked here, let me say, are Australia, Canada, India, Ireland, Nigeria, Russia, South Korea, Sweden, and big time, the UK. And finally, I'll say that the more I listen to, the closer I feel to being connected to the world and even people not like me. And strangely enough, it also makes me appreciate more what we have here and what we do here. Speaking of what we do here, the featured song. As I mentioned, I'm part Hungarian. So as a challenge a few years ago, and there were other reasons, I wrote and sang and produced a song twice. First in Hungarian and then in English. And to prep for that, I listened to a ton of Hungarian music. It was one of the first times I discovered that not all so-called foreign or world music sounds like folk music. And in fact, most of it doesn't, even if it has tinges of it here and there. Hungary actually has thriving rock, hip-hop, and EDM scenes, among many others. So I took that cue and created this synth-pop song called Mind Repüljön, which is the companion and Hungarian translation of the Rec song, Whatever We Have to Do to Wake Up High from Synergy for the Weird. This song, Mind Repüljön, is entirely in Hungarian. I worked my ass off to get the right words, phrasing, and to pronounce everything correctly. And let me tell you, Hungarian is not easy. It took a long time and a lot of takes. It's not an Indo-European language, so it's not related to French or German or Italian or Spanish. I think you're going to find Mind Repüljön damn fun. And please also find it on streaming by clicking the link and liking and sharing and playlisting. Or you can stick around and you'll hear it in just a minute. Questions. How many of the artists I mentioned did you already know? I bet you not many. What bands or artists from other countries come to mind that you think American listeners don't know enough of? Are you surprised that the artists I mentioned were so huge? Way huger than most American artists? Does any of this make you want to listen for yourself? I hope it does. And does it make you think differently about other cultures? Very important there. I want to know the answers to all these questions and more because, as always, my objectives here are music, conversation, and connection. Thanks for hanging with me for this extra long, packed episode, and I'll talk to you next week.